Oh, didn't see you there. Give me a sec. Welcome back to Who's Art It. In this episode, I get to sit down with the founder of Upfest, Steve Hayles, and we discuss street art in Bristol and just the overall aspect of art. Welcome back to Who's Art It, and today I get to sit down with arguably one of the biggest organisers of street art in this country, especially, I would say. Steve Hayles.
Hayles, yep.
Hayles, got it. See, I'm getting better with these last names. Steve organises Upfest, and I'm sure you guys that are watching this video know what Upfest is. But to those that don't, describe Upfest a little bit to me.
Okay, so Upfest, I guess that the strap line is that it's Europe's largest street art and graffiti festival. Mm-hmm. It's basically a weekend, or in the future it's going to be over a longer period, but the USP, I suppose, is the fact that it's a live arts festival.
Yeah.
So rather than going to like a museum or gallery, etc., you actually see the artist sort of like creating the work. And that's kind of, yeah, that I guess sort of sums it up. You know, we can talk about what is street art and what is graffiti and all that sort of stuff.
I'm sure we'll get into that.
Get into that. But yeah, ultimately we work with multiple different art forms that come to the festival. Paint on small, medium, large scale, paintings, some sculpture stuff. But yeah, it's the creation of that live, which kind of intrigues the visitor, I suppose.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
or makes it a bit different to traditional kind of sort of ways of viewing art.
I suppose it's a bit of a performance in a way.
It's exactly that.
You're taking a visual art and turning it into almost a performance art in a way. But so Upfest was found in 2008.
That's right. Yep.
Was that with a group of individuals?
Yeah. So back then. I guess my backstory just probably then leads into that.
Yeah.
Is I used to be a compliance manager for an insurance company, and I was sat at my desk one day, and a voluntary redundancy form turned up on my desk, and I ticked the box without really thinking about it. Been with the insurance company for like 10 years or something, and just kind of ticked a box, and then a month later a letter came and said you've got it. So that that's kind of where things started to sort of like change for me. At the same time, I started to sort of volunteer for kind of art stuff in Bristol.
Yep.
I came to Bristol about 20 years ago. And started to try and sort of volunteer for stuff, and I would do the odd bit of volunteering, but then found it, it's actually quite difficult to sort of like continually volunteer or find like, good organisations to sort of be with and stuff. A friend of mine, I started to buy and sell a little bit of artwork online, and I'd sold a piece to a lady in London. We started chatting after I sold all the artwork, and then we went to a couple of smaller events like paint jams around the UK, one specifically in Southampton called Super Cans, which was in the back of a pub. And so at that same time everything's kind of happening, and she basically said, why didn't you do something yourself? Because I was finding it quite difficult to get involved, and that's basically what happened. So so with her and another sort of friend that we knew who was into sort of graphic design, we're sort of like the three of us got together, and then quite quickly that built to a crew of about sort of 10 sort of volunteers. I guess the Upfest was born. The first festival was at the Tobacco Factory in their car park. And when we were trying to, or when we were looking for sort of like for a venue, we came across this great venue in an area where there was, no other real art. The Tobacco Factory had a theatre, but there was definitely no other sort of street art or graffiti even. And so we spoke to the owner, which is Bristol's old mayor, George Ferguson, and he was just like, well, yeah, give it a go, let's see what you can do. And at the same time, we've spoken to a number of quite cool artists, and sort of said, "Oh yeah, we've got a great venue." You know, at the time we didn't have either, but it kind of sort of these things sort of happen at the same time, and and we got the venue, and we had some cool artists sort of say, "Oh yeah, we'll come and paint." And I think the first festival, it was on a October afternoon after their market had finished. So it started at 3:00. It was rained, like it does most years at Upfest. It rained, and and that's kind of there's about 45 artists, and we probably had an equal number of people come and see us. But I think the main thing was that it was with street artists, especially back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of them were sort of stencil artists and stuff, and they're very much like bedroom DJs.
Yeah.
And most of them work independent, you know, work on their own, and so they weren't actually getting to meet other artists, or at least not other artists which were doing the similar sort of art form. So the festival kind of brought those together, and I think that was the main thing. That sort of the reason why we did that second year, because off the back of the first year we suddenly met 45 friends in effect, we made 45 friends. So the following year 100 artists came, because the friends of those artists then said, "Oh, you should come along to this." And so the second year, you know, it was like 100 artists, and then so on and so forth, really.
It just carried on growing. So rolling back a little bit, so you were an insurance banker, am I?
Not a banker, I was compliance manager.
Compliance manager, thank
Which
you.
I like to make the difference, because compliance is about making sure the company's not doing wrong things.
Of course.
That was how I justified doing the role. So, but that's what I was doing. And
obviously that's quite an interesting line of work outside of the art spectrum, I suppose. So I'm interested in how yourself got interested in the arts. Is it something you've always been?
Yeah, something I've always been interested in, So I did... I did obviously art at school and stuff, and just been semi sort of creative myself, and at that first festival, I alongside this kind of meeting and selling artwork and that sort of thing, I'd started to do some bits and bobs myself, mainly because of the kind of the Banksy effect, and I'd started cut a couple of stencils like everybody does, and realised I was rubbish, and that took a couple of years to realise, but equally realised that there was a lot of other artists which were phenomenal, were really great at it and stuff. So
absolutely.
So I kind of went from doing sort of being a hobby artist for 2 or 3 years, and then realising actually I don't need to do that, because there's lots of other people that can do it for me.
I think that's a really interesting transition. I'd love to come back to that maybe a little bit later in. I know we're not talking for too long, but so obviously starting in 2008, started quite small, 45 artists at the back of the tobacco factory. Last year you had... what was the attendance number? It was 50?
So the last festival we did, so I guess there's the whole COVID thing that's happened and stuff. So actually the last main festival we did was 2018. Yeah. Because in 2019 we had a year off, because we usually take a year off every 4 years, a bit like Glastonbury and let the grass grow and shit like that. Yeah. And so we had a year off in 2019. Obviously COVID hit, so we didn't do 2020 or 2021. But in 2018, we had 400 artists representing 70 countries, and we had 60,000 visitors to the festival over the weekend. And obviously we now have about 130 spots around Bedminster, which, get repainted every so often or annually at the festival. So actually the number of visitors that come to the area during the year is,
amplified.
Is probably sort of 5 times the number that come to the festival.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I'm interested. Well, the question primarily is, I'm interested in your perspective in regards to how Upfest has changed since the start. Because 2008, it's a decent amount of time ago. Yeah. And obviously running it every year for 4 years, Glastonbury. So do you think the core idea of Upfest has changed in that time, or has it stayed very relevant to what it was at the start?
There definitely has been some changes. I can cover a few of those. Like there's been some which I guess are slightly sort of negative in a way, because the first year we put a call out and we got 45 artists and we said yes to everybody. The second year we had 100 and we said yes to everybody, and then it was 150, then 200, and then basically we got up to this kind of 350, 400 level, and we went, shit, we can't have any more than that. That's a lot of artists to kind of organise. So so at that stage we then had to start doing I don't like to call it a selection process because it's not really a selection process. I will explain about it because it's quite integral to how we kind of operate now.
Absolutely.
But in 2018, we had 1,100 artists apply for 400 spaces.
Wow.
So that's 700 artists you're turning down.
Yeah.
And you kind of like, in an ideal world, I'd have 1,100 artists come and paint.
Yeah.
But that's not the case because from our point of view, it is basically about, everybody getting an opportunity and everybody having an opportunity. And, there are lots of sort of now sort of street art festivals all the way around the world. Lots of places have them and stuff. And there's two sort of models. There's the kind of model like ours, which is very much looking at a spectrum of artists from kind of emerging through to established. And then there's other ones which just work with established artists. And you just get that kind of similar sort of, not similar, but, the same sort of group of artists kind of going from one big festival to another and stuff, and they generally have 30, 40 artists there and stuff, and you get to see world-class artists, but you don't have all those emerging ones. So from our point of view, it's we invite 10 lead artists to the festival, and then outside of that 390 spaces go through this sort of process, and that process, at least to start with, doesn't actually look at the artist's work. So we have some criteria. So one of our driving thing, or a number of our driving things, first one is that we have as much representation as possible from various countries. So each year we try to beat the number of countries that we get represented. So if we get somebody from Timbuktu apply, and they're the only artist applying from Timbuktu, we don't judge their work, we just agree that they can come. And, they travel under their own steam and they come to the festival. Equally, we probably get 250 artists apply from London. So actually, that's where we just start to do a selection process that we have to look at that. We also do that across the spectrum of styles. So, for instance, if you're an urban knitter and we only get 2 of those apply, you'll get a space. Whereas if you're not so much anymore, but definitely in those mid years, if you're a stencil artist, they was predominantly, 1 year I think sort of 70% of the people that applied were stencil artists, and so that was the group that got cut. And then the other thing that's kind of sort of like has been a driver in more recent years is basically getting a gender balance to the festival. Putting sort of female artists in sort of senior positions within the festival onto certain walls, etc., in order to increase the number of applications from some sort of female artists.
Absolutely.
Which has worked really well. I think 2018, 2017, we worked with Bristol Women's Voice because it was the centenary of the suffragette movement, and and we had a goal to kind of hit a 30%, which I think 29.7%. It was so close. But subsequently projects that we've now done, like the one that we've done this year, because we couldn't do the festival, which was 75 walls. We did 75 walls in supposedly 75 days. Apart from obviously having to chop one person in half, we made that an equal split of gender. So that's been sort of like really important. These kind of sort of like driving sort of and I do get it, because like some artists are kind of like, well, I've been painting for years, I do, my artwork is far beyond that person's artwork in terms of experience. Let's not start judging artwork, but in terms of experience, I've been painting, why did they get a space and I didn't? And it's just like, but in actual fact they just travelled from Timbuktu, and you can come next year, that's kind of
I think that must be quite an interesting and quite difficult in some respects process of selecting artists, because art as an overall theme is not necessarily subjective in picking the best, because there isn't such a thing as the best per se, but that must be quite an interesting thing. But talk a little bit more about the 75 paintings in 75 days, because obviously Upfest hasn't been able to be run, as you said. I know that you did a virtual Upfest, which if I would love to touch upon if we can stretch it. Tell me the thesis behind the 75 paintings in 75 days. What was the goal for that?
Okay, so a lot of it was just a practical solution. We didn't know whether we were going to be able to put the festival on this last year. So what we did was we split the festival into 2. So we said, actually, we're going to repaint the wall. We're going to repaint a number of walls, and then we will do the festival. obviously because of COVID and the uncertainty, etc., we weren't able to then do the actual festival. But it meant that we had this plan to do these 75 walls, and we were fortunate enough to get some Arts Council recovery funding, and also some of the sponsorship money that we had received to do the festival.
Yep.
Our main sponsor, which is Posca, were really supportive in allowing us to carry that over into the 75 walls project, and the same with Cobra Spray Paint as well. They came on board, and they had already given us a number of spray paint to do the festival, and they allowed us to basically use that to do the 75 walls. So outside of that, there wasn't really much more sort of like to it. For us, the main difference from our sort of side, from a production point of view, was actually it's been a lot more work doing 75 walls in 75 days than it is doing 75 walls in 2 weeks.
Yes.
Because at that time, it's a lot easier to get a bulk of volunteers together for a couple of weeks than it is spread over 75 days, and therefore actually the team, the kind of the core team at Upfest actually spent more time on the 75 walls than they would have normally. The nice thing about that is we've been able to spend a lot more time with artists.
Yes.
Which there goes back to, in the early years, it was great because I would know, or we would all know, kind of all the artists by name. They would all be our friends.
Yeah.
It was all really, and then as it started to scale up, you would meet artists, but you would only get a very short time with them. So that's been, I guess, one of the downsides of creating something so big, is actually, selfishly, our time with the artists has become less.
Yes, diminished.
But
slightly.
equally, our volunteer base has grown massively, and suddenly those volunteers have had time to spend with artists.
Yes.
So they've kind of so they've got that sort of that benefit in a way, whereas us as organisers have somewhat come sort of detached.
Absolutely.
So there's always pros and cons, isn't there? It's
especially, and sort of speaking about like the detachment, obviously, as we all know, in the last 24 months now at least, with with COVID and everything completely changing somewhat of the landscape for events, especially an event such as Upfest, which is such large scale. You guys ran a virtual Upfest.
Yep.
Which I think a lot of people in the art world transitioned to doing a lot of virtual work. I saw massive growth in virtual exhibitions, etc. That must have been a really different process to running Upfest normally.
It's a lot easier.
Yeah.
Well, we work with a Bristol company called Zebra VR. And we basically, because we didn't, our background's not in tech, so they came on board and put in a lot more time than they should have done. And we kind of had this vision. I suppose I was seeing a lot of these sort of virtual festivals, which were, you log on to a site and you watch a recording, and you might have a link to watch 20 different recordings of different things, or supposedly go into different rooms, but it's in effect it's a recording, obviously some live sort of performances and stuff. So I was very much like, I want people to try and sort of visualize Upfest, and Upfest is all about sort of getting artworks in public or on walls or on boards. So that was the driver behind doing the virtually Upfest, is that, and it's still available now on our website, and you can go in and whether you've got a VR headset or not, it's like like Minecraft and stuff, where you can kind of walk down the street and sort of have a look around. And so it was basically allowing you to view artworks from different sort of perspectives. It served a purpose, and I think definitely there is a future for it, but it didn't. The amount of money that we had, we didn't have the ability for people to stand there and have conversations in the street. So you didn't have like an avatar speaking to another avatar, which, would be amazing. But, companies spend billions on creating those sorts of worlds. So we just didn't have that, obviously. And so it was good. And we've got this world now. And, when we get time, actually replacing the artwork on the buildings, I think the real thing for me of it was that the company recreated North Street. So if you know North Street and you've been to the festival, you recognise the shapes of the buildings and stuff. So from that perspective, it was really good. But yeah, it's not a festival.
No,
you know.
It's not 50,000 people.
Well, it's not 50,000 people, but it's also just not. It's not live, is it? It's not kind of, the whole thing about Upfest is that, you can watch an artist spray a spray can, paint a brush or sculpt something, and you kind of see their hands moving and stuff. Anything sort of digital, you just don't have that.
There's a level of disconnect. I think.
There is, yeah. But I know equally, obviously, there is an accessibility benefit to it.
Absolutely.
That actually more people can access it. And more people around the world can access it. So you've got that sort of benefit of from that, from that sort of side of things.
I suppose it's like two sides of a coin, isn't it? There's the pros and the cons.
Yeah, there's always pros and cons and everything.
Weighing those up.
Yeah.
So as we're sort of drawing to an end, I want to come back to the beginning of this conversation. So you moved to Bristol 20 odd years ago, here, there or thereabouts. I recently had an amazing opportunity to sit down with John Doe in this similar setting and have a chat with him. And in that interview with him, I asked him about the street art scene in Bristol, obviously, that he's, well versed in it, been here a long time. And in that, he sort of mentioned that the street art scene, so the street art side of things in Bristol, isn't necessarily as strong as it used to be. And I wanted to get your take on it, being that you run Upfest, the biggest street art festival, and especially based here in Bristol.
Yeah.
Do you think the street art scene has changed, or is it not quite as strong? I know there's quite a strong graffiti, graph scene here.
Yeah. I think this kind of comes back to the whole sort of terminology, really. Okay. So you can look, if you look at street art as a genre, you would probably connect that predominantly with stencil art.
Yeah.
What you now have is you can now class street art as just the equivalent of public art. So actually, I guess from John's perspective, being a stencil artist, there's not so many active stencil artists.
Yes.
But what there is there's a lot more mural artists. So the kind of, and a lot more contemporary artists that have recognised the power of actually putting their artwork on the street. So I'd say the amount of artwork going up on the street in Bristol is as equal to, if not more, because bigger scale. Going back sort of like 5 years, we probably had 40 spaces in Bedminster. We've now got 130. So, so I think it just depends on what type of artist you are as to how active you think the scene is. In actual fact, the scene's become active in different ways. Yeah,
absolutely. Interesting. So going forward, Upfest, when can we expect it? When's it starting again?
So we, obviously this is all subject to gaining licenses, etc. and stuff, but we've had the dates of the Jubilee Bank holiday weekend, so it's the 4th and 5th of June. That confirmed. The format of the festival is changing in that we will be repainting the walls along North Street and East Street and in the area in the 2-3 weeks building up to the festival. So the kind of diehard sort of street art fans can come and spend a couple of weeks in Bristol, see all the kind of big walls being painted. And they will start to peter out towards the actual festival weekend, which will be down at Greville Smythe Park and Ashton Gate Stadium, where you'll have the other 300 artists come and sort of paint live on the boarding for the weekend. We've had to go that route for various sort of reasons,
of course,
making it sustainable and stuff. So but that's basically that's next year, or whenever this goes out. It could be this year. We should be opening up registration for next year's festival. We have around about 200 artists which applied for previous festivals which haven't been able to paint. So they will be carried over, which will leave roughly about 200 spaces for new artists or artists that haven't applied, etc., to come in and register. Registration should close around the end of January. Obviously, when we're speaking, I'm not quite sure of those exact dates, but check out our social media, and if you're viewing this in January, then you should be able to go onto our website and see the registration and stuff.
Awesome. So you guys have a shop as well, I believe, over in Bedminster?
Yeah. So we've got the gallery in Bedminster. So we started over in St Paul's, and we had a little gallery on Wilder Street, Wilder Gallery. We had that for about a year, and then as the festival started to grow, in 2011 we opened the gallery shop on North Street. Yeah, which keeps us busy.
Yeah,
amongst all other things. So
I was going to say galleries are pretty busy.
Yeah. You know, it's just yeah. And I think as the years go on, basically our criteria for exhibiting in our gallery is that you've painted at the festival. Well, I reckon we've had in excess of 3,000 artists paint at the festival over the last sort of like 13 years.
Yeah.
So
it's quite a catalogue.
Yes, it's quite a catalogue. Yeah.
Awesome,
definitely.
man. No, well, I appreciate you coming on, and everyone that's watching this, make sure you go check out Upfest. All the links will be down in the description below. If you've enjoyed this interview, make sure you like and subscribe. Got to make sure you plug. You know, getting used to doing this. And we hope to see you all at Upfest in June.
In June, yep.
And if you've enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a like. Cheers, guys. Thanks, Steve.
Cheers.
I appreciate it.
No worries.